When her parents sold her due to her inability to have children, a solitary woodcutter with 4 young ones gave her refuge. Beautiful but childless, what value does she hold? Like a tree that bears no fruit. Father, I beg you, please don't do this. Mabel's words quivered as her father pushed her stumbling into the dusty town square. Men cackled. Women murmured amongst themselves. Wide-eyed children peeked from behind their mothers' aprons. The spring breeze brought the smell of dung and chimney smoke, yet nothing cut deeper than the humiliation burning in Mabel's heart. Her father, formerly a well-regarded livestock dealer, now a desperate man drowning in debt, addressed the gathering crowd. Worth half what you'd pay for cattle, neighbors? She's skilled in cooking, needlework, and knows when to hold her tongue. Any man with sufficient funds can claim her this evening. Mabel's face flushed red, not just from the harsh sun, but from painful recollections. She remembered her wedding gown being ripped away, being hauled from her spouse's home like a criminal. 2 long years she'd struggled to conceive, offering prayers each night, choking down every foul remedy the local healer provided, still nothing. Then suddenly her husband brought home a replacement, a younger woman, bold and scheming, who curtsied to his mother and promised to deliver 5 male heirs if God willed it. Mabel wasn't even permitted to remain until evening fell. They cast her out the very same day the new bride arrived. Now she found herself here. Dirt staining her dress, her dignity crushed, with nowhere to turn. Any takers? Her father called out. She's 22, all her teeth intact, just effective where it counts. It's an uncomfortable silence stretched on. Then the crowd separated as heavy footsteps approached, deliberate, unhurried. A figure emerged. Towering and wide-shouldered, his clothing marked with tree sap and wood shavings. His hat concealed much of his face, but his jawline was firm, his hands weathered by labor, and his eyes, when visible, held no malice, only exhaustion. Silas remained wordless. He reached inside his coat and produced a leather coin purse. Metal pieces clinked as they struck the table. No haggling, no inquiries, just enough to silence the mockers. Mabel's father arched an eyebrow. You certain she doesn't come with a money-back guarantee? Silas studied Mabel for a long moment, then faced her father again. She won't face judgment anymore. Those were his only words. He turned and walked away without checking if she would. Mabel stood paralyzed, hands shaking. Is this truly an improvement? Was this compassion or simply another cage? The crowd had already begun to disperse, their interest waning. Her father gave her a rough push. Move along then, you belong to him now. She gathered her small bag containing little more than worn shoes and a locket with her mother's portrait, and trailed the man through the dust. Silas owned a mule-pulled wagon tied near the blacksmith's shop. He didn't assist her up, merely waited patiently. When she finally climbed aboard, he offered her a water container. It's a long journey. She drank. The water carried hints of metal and quietude. They rode in virtual silence through the endless prairie, past dried grasslands, crooked fence posts leaning like elderly men, and an infinite sky. Mabel stole glances at him repeatedly. His face showed weathering, but not advanced age, perhaps 30, maybe less. No marriage band adorned his finger, only a small cut on his knuckle and a wood splinter embedded in his thumb. Why, she eventually murmured. Why did you claim me? For children, he stated flatly. No mother, no time to court properly. Mabel's breathing faltered. So I'm their caretaker. No, just someone who isn't harsh. That's sufficient. The wagon swayed as they crossed a stream bed. Her pulse thundered. In her ears, that evening, they reached a dwelling tucked among pines and cottonwoods. The front steps sagged. A broken wheel rested against the barn. Chickens fled as they approached. 4 children watched from behind a window covering. 3 boys, 1 girl, all with rosy cheeks and cautious, wide eyes. This is Miss Mabel, Silas announced. She'll be remaining with us. The smallest boy, not yet 3, wobbled over and embraced Silas's leg. Silas lifted him with one arm and pushed open the door with the other. Your room is upstairs, he told Mabel. Fresh water's in the pail. She climbed the steps, her legs unsteady. The bed was modest but tidy. Solitary window faced the fields. She sat on the edge and wept quietly, making no sound. She hadn't chosen this path, but for the first time in weeks, nobody questioned why she was damaged. And nobody expected her to be anything other than herself. Silas's home rested peacefully at the forest's edge, as if it had always belonged there, formed from bark and wild herbs. The roof bore patches of tanned leather. The porch groaned under every footstep, and instead of a proper door, only a nailed blanket blocked the wind. Inside, the atmosphere held scents of pine sap, stale bread, and children's clothing. The 4 little ones weren't angels. They behaved like untamed cubs, quick to flee, hesitant to trust. The eldest boy, Josiah, studied Mabel with suspicious eyes. The second, Eli, was boisterous and perpetually hungry. The girl, Hannah, attached herself to her father's leg, like a bramble, while the youngest, Benji, couldn't pronounce her name properly, but followed her shadow as if it offered more safety than his own. Mabel began cautiously. She heated water on the wood stove, ruined the first batch of beans, and wept when her bread failed to rise. She mended socks with fingers that hadn't grasped a needle in weeks. She spoke sparingly. Her voice remained too delicate still. One afternoon, while attempting to move a pot of stew, she stumbled and sent the entire contents crashing to the floor. The noise frightened the hens outside. The children stood frozen. Mabel stared at the disaster in terror, expecting a blow or harsh words to follow. But Silas simply approached, crouched down, retrieved the pot, and said, "It's merely stew, nothing more." No fury, no disappointment. That night she sat outside on the porch, struggling not to cry again. She failed. Later she tucked the children into bed. Her hands trembled slightly as she drew the blanket over Benji's chest. He coughed. Anna whimpered and clung to her once more. She attempted humming an old lullaby, her voice uncertain, wavering like a flickering candle flame. Then a storm arrived. The wind shrieked, trees bent, and little Hannah burned with fever. Silas, who could wield an axe single-handed, gazed helplessly at the child, uncertain how to proceed. Mabel acted swiftly. She boiled willow bark, crushed mint leaves, bathed the girl's forehead with cool cloths, whispering gently throughout the night. Her hands never ceased moving, not once. She didn't sleep. When morning came, the girl's fever had subsided too. Hannah opened her eyes and mumbled something about pancakes. Silas stood in the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing, but his jaw relaxed, his shoulders lowered. He looked at Mabel as if she had performed something sacred. Mabel, bleary-eyed, and too exhausted to smile, simply nodded. That morning, after she dressed the children, she descended to find a kettle on the stove. Steam rose from the spout. A cup waited nearby, and on the table lay a small note in rigid, uneven script. "Thank you," she smiled once more. No name, no signature. She sat on the worn bench, cradling the cup in both hands. The tea was potent and bitter with pine, but it warmed her chest. She gazed toward the woods beyond the window. Something was shifting. Not rapidly, not dramatically, but genuinely. She had been discarded like damaged furniture, sold like cattle, measured by a womb that refused to flourish. But here in this crooked cabin with no proper door, someone noticed her hands, her efforts, her compassion, not her shortcomings. That afternoon, Benji toddled up, raised his arms, and spoke one word clear as dawn. "Maple." "Time in weeks," she smiled back, not from obligation, but from genuine desire. Spring gradually crept into the pines, softening the harsh cold that had gripped the land. Mabel no longer wept at night. Her fingers regained their steadiness. Her voice grew stronger. She began teaching the children letters using charcoal on worn boards, helped them learn their names, and hummed simple melodies. She showed Hannah how to tie a ribbon in her hair and crafted matching scarves from old grain sacks for each of them. They called her Miss May. She never corrected them. But even as the days warmed, fear remained lodged beneath her ribs like an unhealed wound. One afternoon, Silas asked if she could accompany him to town to purchase salt and metal nails. He said nothing further, just tossed her the reins as if she belonged. At the general store, Mabel stepped out while Silas waited in line for supplies. The air was thick with gossip as always, and then a voice, sharp and cruel, cut through the chatter. "Well, if it isn't the Baron Spectre herself?" Abel turned slowly. Her former mother-in-law stood before the dry goods display, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. Beside her was the replacement wife, young smug, wearing lace gloves and touching her belly in an overly practiced gesture. "That's her?" Girl asked loud enough for half the market to hear. "Yes," the older woman sneered. "Beautiful, but cursed. Couldn't give us even a crying infant." "I will," the girl declared, chin raised. "A big, healthy boy who will carry the family name."
What?
"Like her worthless as a cracked vessel?" Mabel's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She didn't speak. Her throat was thick with everything. She refused to give them the tears, the anguish, the shame. She turned to leave. Then a hand touched her shoulder. Silas, he had emerged from the store's shade. Dirt still clinging to his boots, eyes like storm clouds. He looked at the two women without blinking, then turned to Mabel, his voice steady and low. "She's the only one who can get my daughter to sleep," he said. "It's the only one who taught Benji not to hurl stones. The only one who makes our house feel like it has a roof." Neither woman responded. They just stared. Then Silas led Mabel away. No more words wasted. Mabel remained quiet the entire wagon ride back. That night, when the children were asleep, she made a small wreath from the wild flowers that bloomed near the well. She didn't know why. She just needed to create something soft with her own hands again. Weeks passed. Then the whispers began. The replacement wife, so proud and fertile, still had no child. Her belly remained flat. Her voice grew sharper. She refused to attend church. Whispers became rumors. She had taken up with a mail carrier from the post station. Desperation drove her to a dangerous scheme, fake a pregnancy by any means. Truth has a scent, and it lingers. Her husband discovered the deception. The news spread like wildfire. He cast her out, tore down the nursery curtains, cursed the lies. He aged a decade in days. Then one morning, Mabel was in town purchasing flour when he appeared. Her former husband looked worn and wrinkled, hat crushed in his hands, shame written on every line of his face. "Mabel," he said, soft and broken, "I was wrong. I see it now. You are the only woman who ever truly cared for me, the only one who." She raised her hand. "Remember the day you allowed your mother to spit on me, the day you threw me out like spoiled food because my body couldn't do what yours couldn't either." He swallowed, eyes darting. "I was a fool." Mabel stepped forward, voice steady. "I have 4 children who embrace me when I wake up. I have a man who never asks what I cannot give, only what I wish to share. My house is full of warmth, of laughter, of peace." She paused. "And I would rather sweep ashes for Silas than sit in your parlor like a porcelain prize." He opened his mouth but said nothing. She turned and walked away. From across the street, Silas stood holding a bag of rice. He had witnessed it all, heard it all. His face held no pride, only something. Deeper gratitude and love, not born of pity, but of choice. Chosen not once, but every day. The sky was streaked with ash and orange, a weary dusk settling over the valley. When Mabel stepped out to the well, she had forgotten to fetch water for the morning. The children were asleep. The night was quiet. She didn't notice the man at first. Jed, the trapper from down the ridge, half drunk as usual, leaning on the fence post that bordered their property. "Well, look who it is," he slurred. "The pretty little mule Silas dragged home from the market. Thought you were barren, but heard you've been raising kids just fine." Mabel stiffened. "It's late, Jed. You should head home," he chuckled. "Just wanted to look." "Silas keeps you locked up tighter than a coin purse." She turned to leave, but he moved fast. Too fast. His hand closed around her wrist, rough, unwashed, the grip tighter than necessary. "Come on now," he breathed, reeking of sweat and whiskey. You owe us all a little smile after all that gossip." Before she could scream, before she could wrench free, shadow moved like thunder from the barn. Silas? He was there in an instant. No words, no warning. One punch, clean, fast, straight to Yet's jaw. The man crumpled like wet canvas to the dirt. For a moment, all was still. Even the wind seemed to stop. Silas stood over him, chest heaving, blood trickling from his knuckles. Mabel stared, heart pounding, but not from fear. She had never seen Silas raise his voice, let alone his hand. Jed groaned on the ground, but Silas didn't look at him. Ain't turned to Mabel instead, eyes dark and wild. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. She nodded, but her eyes were glassy. Her hands trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure why. Silas stepped closer, untying the red kerchief. From his neck, gently he reached for her hand, the one Jed had grabbed, and wrapped the cloth around her wrist. "No one touches you," he said. Not unless you say. His voice wasn't angry, just firm. Final. Then he looked at his own hand, bruised, bleeding, and shook his head. "Damn fool," he muttered, more to himself than her. Back inside, Mabel washed his knuckles. She used boiled water and a clean scrap of muslin. The room was silent, but full of tension of something unnamed. "You didn't have to," she said quietly. "He would have left." Silas looked at her, eyes softening. "He shouldn't have grabbed you." Dabbed at the blood. "Still, you don't even like fighting." "I like less seeing someone hurt you." She blinked hard. "Breath-catching. I cried," she admitted. "But not because I was scared, because no one's ever stood up for me like that." He said nothing. Just looked at her like she was something delicate but not breakable, something worth defending. When she finished, she sat back. He flexed his fingers. "Thank you," she said. Silas shrugged. "I reckon I don't want a world where folks like him think they can talk to you that way." She smiled, small and grateful. Her wrist still ached, but her heart, for the first time in years, felt held. Outside, the stars were sharp and bright. Inside, a man who never raised his voice had finally raised his hand for her. And she, a woman always told she was too little to matter, had been shielded like something precious. It wasn't love yet, but it was the shape love might take. It was a morning lined with frost. It's a kind that clung to fence posts and left breath visible. Mabel was kneading dough in the kitchen when the scream rang out across the yard, sharp, high, and unmistakably. One of the children. She dropped the bowl, flour flying into the air like snow, and ran barefoot across the packed dirt. Silas single quotes his youngest son, Caleb, was crumpled near the woodpile. His leg was twisted awkwardly beneath him, the axe lying nearby, its edge streaked with red. "Oh God," she whispered, dropping to her knees. Silas was already there. His face tight, arms steady, as he lifted the boy gently. "Go boil water," he said, voice calm but urgent. "Bring the bandages from the pantry." Her heart hammering, her hands clumsy with haste. When she returned, Silas had laid the boy on the kitchen table, his pants cut open at the thigh. Blood welled from a long, ragged gash. Mabel's hands shook as she pressed the cloth to the wound. Caleb cried out, his face pale. "I know, baby," she whispered, voice cracking. "I know it hurts. Just hold on." Her tears dripped onto the boy's leg as she worked. Her fingers smeared red as she cleaned, wrapped, tied. She prayed with every knot, every whisper, and a tiny voice through clenched teeth. "Don't cry, Mama." She froze. The word lingered in the warm, damp air. "Mama." Caleb blinked at her, lips trembling. "You make the best biscuits.
What?
You sing soft like my real mama used to." Mabel cupped his cheek with a trembling hand, the tears falling freely now. Later, when the boy was resting, his leg elevated, the other children gathered near the fire. One brought her a blanket, another offered her a carved toy horse. "Papa said you're staying," said the middle child, a freckled girl with a serious brow. "Does that mean you're our mama now?" Mabel couldn't speak. She only nodded. They didn't. "Need more?" From that night on, they called her Mama without prompting. It wasn't loud, not ceremonious, just real. A name formed by love, not birth. Silas watched it all in silence. He saw the way she held their hands when they were afraid of the dark, the way she braided hair with care, the way her eyes softened. When one of them whispered her name, that night, after the house had gone still, Silas stepped out onto the porch where she sat alone under the stars. He stood there a long time before speaking. "I ain't ever been a good talker, you know that." She looked up. "You say enough." He nodded. "When I put money down at that market, I thought I was giving you a way out. But I never thought I had a right to keep you." Mabel turned, heart thudding. "I figured you'd leave once you had your footing," he continued. "And if that's what you want, I won't stop you. I won't hold you to what started as a sale." She stared at him, every muscle in her body trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper, older, more tender. "I used to think love meant being chosen at first sight," she said softly. "But I've learned something better, being chosen again. After people see who you really are." Silas's jaw tightened. "If you're not sending me away," she added, "then I'm not going." The porch creaked beneath her as she stepped toward him, took his calloused hand. "I may not have made these children," she said, "but they made me something I thought I'd never be. And you let me be that without demanding anything in return." He looked at her then, not with desire, not with guilt, but with awe, like she was the one who had rescued him. "I just wanted you safe," he said. "And now I want more than safe," she replied. He pulled her gently into his arms, not as a man claiming a prize, but as a man who had been given a second chance and was wise enough to hold it gently. Inside, the fire crackled low. Outside, frost crept across the ground, but between them, warmth grew. Quiet promise built not on blood, but on belonging. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees, golden and soft, as Mabel walked hand in hand with the oldest of Silas's children down the dirt path that led to the one-room schoolhouse. His hand was small but firm, and hers warm with trust. He was 10, bright-eyed with a defiant smirk that often made her want to both scold and kiss his forehead. Today, though, he was quiet, maybe nervous, clutching his reader book like it was a life raft. When they reached the little building, the teacher, a tall, lean man with spectacles too large for his nose, welcomed them inside. "We're just catching up on paperwork," he said politely, flipping through some forms. "I just need to finalize the birth registry, Mom." Mabel nodded, smoothing the boy's collar. "What's your full name, son?" the teacher asked. The boy straightened. "Thomas Jennings? And your mother's name?" There was a pause. The teacher's pen hovered. Mabel's breath caught. Thomas looked up. At her, then back at the teacher, his voice clear and sure. "Mabel Silas." She blinked. Her heart felt like it had been caught mid-beat. "Is that your mother's married name?" the teacher asked, slightly confused. Thomas nodded with a seriousness too old for his age. "That's what we call her," the teacher. Perhaps used to complexities in frontier families, simply wrote it down and smiled. "Very well, Mabel. Silas, it is." Mabel felt the sting behind her eyes long after they stepped back outside. She had worn many names in her life. Mabel Barnes, daughter of a man who sold her. Mabel Jennings' wife to a man who rejected her womb before her heart. Mabel, nothing, whispered behind her back in the market. But this name had not been given by law or man. It had been spoken by a child with no reason to lie, no need to flatter, just truth. When they returned to the cabin, the smell of smoke and pine welcomed them. Silas was at the table, carving something small. A bird, maybe. He looked up at her with a soft grunt. "The boy do all right?" "He did more than all right," she whispered. Later that evening, as she folded laundry by the fireplace, Silas came over and set something beside her. It was a leather-bound notebook, its pages clean and untouched. He sat down beside her, hands resting on his knees. "I don't got much to offer that ain't covered in sap or dirt," he said slowly. "But I figure if anyone earned a fresh page, it's you." She opened the book, ran her fingers over the first page, blank ready. "I used to dream of starting over," she said. "But I never thought I'd get to write the story myself." Silas nodded. "You write what you want or nothing. It's yours." She looked at him. "Will you read it?" "Only if you let me." She turned back to the page, held the pen like it was a promise. And slowly, with deliberate strokes, she wrote, "Today is the first day I was loved without having to give birth to anyone." She didn't look up as she wrote it. She didn't need to, because the warmth at her side, the quiet trust in the cabin, the way Thomas had said her name, all of it was real. When she finished, Silas gently took the pen from her fingers and set it down. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead softly against hers. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what? For staying long enough for us to love you, right?" And in that quiet, fire-warmed room, the woman once sold for less than a cow was reborn, not through law or marriage, but through something deeper, something true. The heat settled over the land like a curse. Rain had not touched the soil in over 7 weeks. The once green edges of Cross Hollow were now brittle and cracked, as if the ground itself had forgotten how to breathe. Trees leaned in silence. The creek behind the house, once lively with frogs and laughter, had thinned to a muddy trickle. Crops withered under the relentless sun. The corn died first, then the beans. Silas didn't say much, but his shoulders carried more weight with each passing day. He worked longer, ate less, and came home with dirt in his hair and defeat in his eyes. Mabel watched the children count potatoes like marbles. She heard their stomachs growl at night, though none complained. Even the youngest had learned to be brave when there was nothing left to cry over, but Mabel would not accept silence, not now. She woke before dawn and filled every bucket, pot, and wash basin with water from the deepest well. Then she pulled a scarf over her hair, wrapped her hands in cloth, and marched toward the dead garden. She dug even when the earth was hard as stone. She broke the dirt open, turned it over, made room for roots, even where life seemed unwelcome. The other workers watched her. Some shook their heads. A few offered to help, but she refused. This was her fight. Every morning, she watered the patch. Every evening, she checked the soil. When the leaves sagged, she sang old lullabies as she poured water gently at their base. One afternoon, Silas stumbled through the door, face pale, knees buckling. She caught him before he hit the ground. "Just tired," he rasped, waving her off. But she felt the heat on his skin. He burned with fever for 2 nights. Mabel stayed beside him, wiping sweat from his brow, spooning broth into his mouth between fits of coughing. She spoke softly stories of green hills and warm bread, though her voice trembled with fear. One night, as the wind howled like a ghost against the shutters, Silas turned in his sleep. His hand reached out blindly and he muttered, "Mabel, don't leave me, not you too." Her breath caught. She leaned down, lips brushing his temple. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "Not when I'm needed." And here I am needed. The fever broke by dawn. When he opened his eyes, she was there, hair undone, dirt smudged on her cheek, hands rough from the hoe, but warm as ever. "You look like hell," he croaked. She laughed. "You should see yourself." Outside, the garden was not dead. Not yet. Tiny green shoots had started pushing through, reaching for life. A week later, one of the boys ran in, shouting, "May, there's a tomato." Mabel ran out. There it was, red and stubborn, clinging to a vine as if defying the sun itself. Silas followed slowly. He stood beside her, staring at that single fruit. "How?" he asked, voice raw. She looked at him. "You taught me not everything worth keeping comes easy?" Glanced down at her blistered hands. Then, without a word, he bent and kissed each knuckle, soft as rain. That night, they shared that tomato between 6 people. It was cut into slivers thinner than coin, but everyone swore it was the best thing they had ever tasted. Later, as the fire crackled low and the children slept in tangled piles on the floor, Silas reached for her hand. "I don't have much left to give," he said. "The land is failing, my strength fades. All I have is this place, these kids, and you." She turned to him, her smile gentle. "Then that's more than enough. Because before you, I had a name no one wanted to say. Now, I have a garden that remembers my hands, children who call me home, and a man who asked me to stay, even in drought." Silas kissed her knuckles again. "You never needed rain to grow something beautiful. And outside, under a sky still waiting to forgive, the garden breathed alive, still trying. Just like her, years passed, but the wind on the hill never changed. It still carried the scent of dry earth, of pine needles baking in the sun, and the faint, stubborn sweetness of mustard greens growing against all odds. Mabel's garden. Once a handful of seeds on cracked soil, now stretched wide behind the house. It wasn't grand or orderly. It bent with the wind, grew in crooked lines, spilled over the rocks and into the path. Oh, it was alive. It was hers. And every morning, Silas stood on the porch, hands behind his back, watching her tend it. He never spoke while she worked. He just stood there, quiet as always, as if watching proof that miracles didn't need loud voices to bloom. Then, one spring the men came, government men in clean boots and dustless hats, holding maps and promises. "There will be a railroad," one said. "Right through this hill, we'll pay good money." Mabel stood silent beside Silas, fingers curled under her apron. "Think of what you could give your children," the man added. "A real home, not just land and stories." Silas looked past them, past the papers and suits and easy smiles to the garden beyond. The plants swayed gently in the breeze. He saw the fence he had built with his own hands, swing Mabel had hung from the oak tree, the stones marking where the dog had been buried, the carved bench where they had sat that first hard winter. Everything that had ever truly belonged to him stood right there. "No," he said simply. They tried again, but he raised a hand. "I'm not moving. Land is not for sale." Later that evening, he and Mabel hammered a wooden sign at the edge of the road. It read, "Not for sale. Someone was once allowed to stay here. That's enough." The news spread through the town. Some mocked him. Others nodded quietly, understanding more than they said. Years went by. Their children married, brought home grandchildren. The house filled with noise and bread baking and the clatter of small feet. Life carved itself into the hill-like roots, deep, steady, unseen from afar, but unshakable. And the garden never died. Even in drought, it came back. Not just mustard greens anymore, but beans, corn, onions, sunflowers, tall enough to hide behind. One crisp fall afternoon, a grandson asked Silas, "Grandpa, why do you never call it just Mabel's garden?" Silas walked the boy to the gate and pointed to the archway above it. There, carved carefully into the wood, were the words, "She did not bear my blood, but she gave birth to the rest of my life." The boy blinked. "You mean she gave you a new start?" Silas smiled. "She gave me everything." When Mabel passed, they buried her at the foot of the garden under the same tree where she had once hung wind chimes. On the stone, Silas etched one line by hand. Here grew everything she was never given, and all that she gave anyway. He sat beside that grave every morning until one day he didn't come out. They buried him beside her beneath the whispering tree. The garden never stopped growing, and long after the railroad curved around the hill, long after the suits forgot why they came, travelers would still pass the old fence and read the sign, "Not for sale." Because sometimes a place remembers those who refuse to leave. Sometimes dry hills bloom for the ones who chose love when no one else did. If this story touched something quiet and true inside your heart, the way Mabel's garden bloomed where no one believed it could, then you're in the right place. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you more than just romance. We bring you grit, sacrifice, and the kind of love that rises from dust and stays through drought. Stories like Mabel and Silas's remind us that even the most forgotten hills can hold the deepest roots. If you want more tales of devotion, defiance, and hard-earned hope, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you never miss a single ride into the untamed heart of the American frontier. Because out here, love is never easy, but it's always worth it.